And the problem is when you look at the Leafs season, the only pushback that they've ever gotten is from like Anthony Stolarz. And I know people will say, yeah, but they went in the third period and they were physical. Doesn't matter. It's too late at that point because your captain's out the rest of the year.
2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to episode 32 of the PuckPedia Hockey Show. Today we have on a very special guest. It's Sportsnet's The Fan 90s Hockey Show, Matt Marchese. Matty, how are we doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for hopping on. We had Futa on about a month and a half ago, so we figured why not get the younger, better-looking co-host on our show this week.
See, here's the problem. I know this goes everywhere because I see these interviews on all sorts of sports websites and everything. He's going to hear that. He's not going to be very happy. So I'm going to say equally as good looking co-host as Mike Futa. Here's the problem. He's also got 2 more Stanley Cup rings than I'll probably ever have. So I'm really behind. So I'll take whatever I can get.
Exactly. At least we can both agree that you're better looking than the guy who hops on your show 4 times a week, Elliotte Friedman.
Well, certainly my hair is more in control, although you can't tell today because it was a rough morning around the house, so I had to put a hat on for this.
I feel like it usually is with you. I'm hearing all good stories on your shows with your kids just running a ruckus up in that house. But no, thank you for hopping on today. Basically, what we'll do is we'll talk about your background, kind of how you got into the hockey media world. Some of these guys in these roles, for example, on these prominent broadcasts, like they have prestigious playing careers or executive careers, like a guy like Mike Futa, and then they get on these media jobs because they have great insight, experience, wisdom. But you kind of went the other route where you had to kind of start from the ground floor and work your way up. So why don't you give our listeners kind of a background on Matt Marchese and how you kind of got yourself up in this position?
So I went to college late, like community college, not like real college. I went to community college late. And I was like 20 years old, still had aspirations of playing college hockey. And I had a couple of offers to go play like Division III. And I just said, you know what, like I don't like school to begin with. So going for 4 years instead of 2 is not something that, I really was interested in. So I ended up going to a community college called Humber College, really good radio program. I took that 2 years. Started out as an intern at what was then the Fan 590, now Sportsnet 590, the Fan. And within 8 months, I was interning on, maybe not even 8 months, maybe less. But anyway, I was interning on what was the biggest show in Canada, which was Primetime Sports with Bob McCowan. I was an associate producer on that show for a few years. Then ended up getting the head producer job and did that for 7 or 8 years. And then Bob left the company. And then there was kind of a transition period, which is then when I had produced Hockey Central at noon years prior, like with when I first started. And then they revamped Hockey Central and just called it Hockey Central. It became, instead of a 1-hour show, a 2-hour show. And I was working with Jeff Marek and Anthony Stewart and Justin Bourne and Brian Burke would join us every Friday. So that was kind of the reinvigoration into getting into hockey. I don't know, a lot of people probably wouldn't know this, but while I was producing the Jeff Marek show, I was also hosting a national NFL show, which was aired across the Sportsnet radio network with Donovan Bennett. So I dabbled in that and then produced Jeff for a couple of years on his show. And then Jeff left. And then it was like, hey, I don't want to say, like, I hate to be so simplistic and say it's next man up. Like, I had to work to get there. I was on air for, 6 or 7 years prior to that, doing evenings and weekends and making a lot of sacrifices. And they presented me with this opportunity and to work with Futa. And Futa and I have known each other for probably 10 years. And even going further back than that, Futa knew my dad. They used to play ball hockey against each other. Futa's a really good ball hockey player, by the way. I make sure I have to add that. He's in the Ontario Ball Hockey Hall of Fame. So, like, with that, Futa and I have always had a good relationship, and it was so seamless and so easy. Like, when we would do interviews and stuff like that, it was just like we were having a conversation, which is what you want in this business. So that's kind of a long-winded tour of how I got to where I am today.
No, and I think that's a good point too. Like when I listen to your guys' show, like it just feels like you guys have had a lot of chemistry and you've known each other for a while. So it's very seamless when you guys are just talking back and forth to each other, or when you have guests on to interview. Like it all just feels like you all have been kind of have that chemistry, and I think that's awesome. And then going back to, and you said you were producing Marek, like we had him on our show a couple months ago, and that guy is awesome, but it must have been hard to be his producer because he just goes in 17 different directions. And I was like, he basically took over hosting my show, and I was like, I got to keep up with Jeff. This guy's awesome. So he's a great guy.
Jeff's a wizard, and I learned so much from working with Jeff. He, like, if it wasn't for Jeff, I don't know that I'd be as good of a broadcaster as I am today, in part because I got to watch him every day. Like I got to work with some really great broadcasters. Like Bob McCowan is kind of the cream of the crop up here in Canada. And then working with Jeff on a daily basis and learning little nuances, and not only just nuances of being a broadcaster, but the business and everything and how to conduct yourself. But also with that being said, like, Jeff made sure that when Jeff was off, that I was the guy that was filling in for him. That was part of the reason why I got the producing job with Jeff, was because he wanted somebody that he could trust. He could go in 100 different directions, and you kind of don't know where he's going next because he's just an encyclopedia of information. But also, he was really easy to work with because he said, Matty, I trust you with the show. So you do what you think is best. And there were some days that were harder than others, but for the most part, like, Jeff was very understanding. Jeff understood, how the producer job works. But also Jeff allowed me to be on the air with him basically every day. And that helps. It makes you comfortable in front of a camera. It allows you to have an opinion on a show that matters, and that show mattered. And so, having said all that, getting into this role now, I owe a lot of that to Jeff and just his faith in me to do the job when he was gone. And now I have the opportunity to have my name on the marquee, which is also pretty cool. But yeah, working with Jeff was a blast, and I really do consider him one of my mentors.
Yeah, now you see a lot of times where these shows, you'll have like two hosts, maybe three hosts, whatever the number is, but the producer now plays like an interesting role where they're doing the live graphics and they're producing the show, but then they're also being brought in by the host on a lot of hockey shows these days. And I think that's an interesting part where the producers kind of slow transition to maybe getting more of a forward facing role. And for you, was that always the plan when you were a producer to like eventually transition to on air, and kind of, is that why most people get into like the radio and that side of the business?
So I always wanted to be on the air. Like I'll tell the story. When I was a kid, and for all the kids that are watching out there, our video game, like, what year are you born, Keith?
93.
Okay, so you're around my vintage. I'm just only a little bit older than you, and by a little bit I mean 4 years. But so for the kids out there, our video games did not have play-by-play. I know it's a shocking thing. The Super Nintendo did not have play-by-play.
The N64s of the world, no play-by-play.
Yeah, well, N64 ended up getting it with like NHL 98 or 99. I can't remember.
Is that the one with Lindros on the cover?
I think so, yeah. So, and I believe that was Jim Houston that did it. So I used to do play-by-play for my video games. That was like my thing. And in some kind of subconscious way, my dad always wanted to be on the air. And my dad, when he was just finished high school, I guess, they had a local cable network sports show, and my dad was on it with his friend. And I have video evidence of this, and the haircut in 1976 is ridiculous. But for some reason, that was just always ingrained in me. And it was always like, we had listened to primetime sports all the time in the car. And I hated it as a kid because I just wanted to listen to music. But I guess in some weird roundabout way, that was kind of what led me to here today. But I always wanted to be on the air. And when I was producing for McCowan, I knew that wasn't a possibility because it was his show, and that's just not how he did things. And that was fine. But I finally went into my boss at the time's office. I guess I was 7 years in. And I said, hey, I just want an opportunity. And if I'm no good, then you don't have to put me back on the air. But I'd like an opportunity, even offered to do it for free. And it worked out. And from that point on, I just, got better and got better. And now I am where I am today. But yeah, that was always kind of the thing. I always joked with people like, I want to be the next Bob McCown. And the producer at the time, who was also the intern coordinator, who's I had my original meeting with at the Fan, Ryan Walsh. And he said, let me put it to you this way. There's going to be nobody ever that's going to be like Bob McCown. And he's right. But it's also an opportunity for you to create your own path. And I feel like I've kind of done that so far.
Yeah, and that's the thing nowadays too, where there's, all you need is internet and a computer, like a camera to record you basically, and everyone kind of can have an opportunity to have a voice and be themselves and create their own content. So I'd say that the entries to barrier is a lot lower than it was back in the day, which is great because you're seeing a lot of these creators do different hockey shows and try different niches. And so that definitely plays a factor into the world today. But now you guys, for example, like I think this is your second or third year doing the show.
Second year doing this show.
Second year doing the show. And now you guys used to have Elliotte on maybe once a week last year. And now you guys are at a point where you've got Elliotte Friedman on 4 times a week on your show for about a half-hour hit, whatever, Monday through Thursday. And I think that has only kind of leveled up the show expectations. And, you watched him at the trade deadline where he was the insider that broke 80 to 90% of the deals. And what's it like working with him and kind of having someone who's so in tune with everything going on around the league? And he seems like a horse with all the different media hits he does and all the flights he's taken and travel and, doing the Olympics and then coming back right into trade deadline. Like, what's it like having Elliotte as part of like a big part of your show at this point?
Honestly, it's the best. He's the insider. He may be the GOAT. And it's funny because there are a lot of people that actually believe that Elliotte and I don't get along, which is
it's a good shtick on the show, but it's probably like so not true at all.
It's very wrestling. Like it is. It's very much
heel. Yeah, he's a heel versus face.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who the heel is anymore. It might still be him, but also because he's on my territory, he's on my show. But it's so much fun because I have such an appreciation for what he does because I make calls around the league just like anybody in this job does. I don't know how he does it with like I just don't know because I could never do something like that, which is why I have more of an appreciation for what he does. And so like he's constantly on. Like he came in the other day. And he didn't even make he came in to drop something off. He dropped off he bought me an Italy Olympics toque that I ended up beanie for those of you.
Yeah, for the American listeners.
Yeah, don't worry. I know my lingo. And so he dropped and he was sitting in the room and he was on his phone. It was like a couple days after trade deadline and he's on his phone and he's constantly on, which is why in the summer, like Elliotte is unreachable. Like he goes off in the distance and you don't
hear from him
until September. And he does because he works very hard at his job. And some people will say, well, that's not hard work because you're on your phone. Like it's mentally exhausting what Elliotte does. And Elliotte puts a lot of pressure on himself. Like, I've never spoken to him about that specifically, but Elliotte thrives to be great. And he is great. And he's great because he works exceptionally hard as anybody, if not harder than anybody in this business. He's so well read. He's doing interviews. He's doing all sorts of stuff. He talks to so many people. Like he's the best for a reason. And to have him on our show 4 days a week is a real privilege. To the point that he's even like during the playoffs, he's like, I'm on every day. So whatever you guys need, unless there's travel issues or whatever, I'm on every day. And that to me is not only a hard worker, but a team player. And Elliotte is very much that. Like, I'll tell the story. Like, you know how this business works. And sorry for the lighting because it's a weird cloudy day here in Southern Ontario. But when people lose their jobs and that kind of stuff happens, that's part of the business. Every time there would be layoffs within the company, Elliotte would call me and say, hey, are you good? And that goes back to the first time that I met Elliotte, and I was producing Primetime Sports, and he was on a round table, and it was the first time that I had ever met him. And Elliotte sits down, and I introduced myself, and I said, I'm only an intern. He says, you're not only an intern. Like, you matter. And that stuck with me for a long time. And since then, Elliotte and I have formulated a good friendship. And I value his opinion. And another one of those, like, I don't look up to Elliotte in the sense that I want to do what he does, because my wife would kill me. But also just like the work ethic and what he puts into the job is what he gets out. And I think that's a really good message for a lot of people. Like, it's just a life lesson. What you put in, you get out. And Elliotte he's the best for a reason.
Exactly. Sometimes in order to get quote unquote lucky, you need to put that hard work in to put yourself in a position to be lucky. Speaking of team players, Matty, let us dive into the NHL this season. And let's specifically talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is, I feel like, the team that you guys talk most about on your show, just given where you guys are located and everything, and the company you work for. But I would like to touch on just, I know a lot of has been made about, the non-response by the guys on the ice when Auston Matthews got a knee-on-knee hit from Radko Gudas last week, in which Auston Matthews is now going to be out for the rest of the season, although it sounds like he avoided the worst-case scenario in a major knee injury. But then also to the point where it felt like the Department of Player Safety went a little light on the suspension, only giving Gudas 5 games, when people around the league, I think Elliotte in particular, found comparables of like a Matt Cook hit, which was 7 games, and it was in the playoffs, which is like double kind of the amount of games. So I want to get your take on just the non-response by the Leafs, but also like the length of that suspension there, and what kind of message that sends to the rest of the leagues and the players around the league. And, Judd obviously went in a little bit with that message.
Well, and then Connor McDavid kind of doubled down on Judd's message, didn't he? I thought the suspension was light. When I saw that he was getting a phone hearing, I thought that was, I mean, maximum 5. I was looking probably between 7 and 10 personally. I know the history doesn't play in unless it's a fine, but it should at least be in the back of your mind. And I know the argument that Anaheim made, as Elliotte reported, was that, he hasn't been suspended since 2019. It doesn't matter. The guy has spent at that point like $750,000 on paying fines that go along with said suspensions. Like, that's a lot. And so the history should matter here. And I know that there are a lot of people that are going to say, oh, well, you're in Toronto, you should be like, I'm not a fan anymore. Like, this is my job. And so if I see something that I think should be called out, then I will call it out. And I think that the Department of Player Safety got this one wrong. To me, it's 7 to 10 games. There was clear intent there. It's not an accident. This is a player that has a history. And no, I'm not bitter about what he did to Sidney Crosby in the Olympics, everybody. But I think that history should matter with stuff like this. As for the non-response, to me, it's egregious. Like, I tweeted about it, and somebody's like, well, I was behind the play. And I'm like, well, what were you doing when the play was going on? Because it was right in the play. Auston Matthews had the puck. It's not away from the play. William Nylander puts his arm up. Morgan Riley doesn't do anything. But even, honestly, Keith, the season's over for the Toronto Maple Leafs. If somebody jumps the bench, take your 10 gamer and be done with it. Because I'm sure Auston Matthews would gladly pay that fine for you. Like, that to me that just shows how broken that dressing room is, how broken the culture is in that room. And that's a problem. If your best player gets hit and it's dirty, there should not even be a thought. You don't even have to fight the guy. Spear him, slash him. I don't care. But you got to do something to start something. And so, to me, I thought that was a mistake by the Leafs. And Craig Berube, as we know, played a certain way. And Craig Berube would probably not be very happy about how that went down. I was like, I don't want to say that I was disgusted, but you see other teams, like, look at what happened when Rasmus Dahlin got attacked by Brandon Hagel. The goalie was ready to go. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was ready to go. Like, that's the type of thing. And the problem is when you look at the Leafs season, the only pushback that they've ever gotten is from like Anthony Stolarz. And I know people will say, yeah, but they went in the third period and they were physical. Doesn't matter. It's too late at that point because your captain's out the rest of the year. Like, their timing, not super great. But listen, this has been an ongoing issue with the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is not a 1 or 2 year thing. This is a multi-year thing. And I'm not saying you need to bring in Ryan Reeves. I'm not saying, like, I don't know why it took 64 games for Michael Pezzetta to get into the lineup. At least he, throws a body check on a forecheck. So I think that's a broken culture, a broken system. And I think it's going to be looked at very heavily in the offseason. Like, they need an absolute culture change. They need different type of leadership in there, and they better find it pretty soon, or it's going to be a long couple of years for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and you heard Berube like explain on the post game press conference that he was basically like, I can't force them to do it. Like, it's something that they have to do. But then at that point too, there's clearly a huge disconnect between the players in the room and the coaching staff, and maybe even management to some extent. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the offseason for the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're going to miss the playoffs this year. We'll see what happens with the draft pick if they end up, having to give it to Boston, or if they get the top 5 protected and are able to make that.
They're screwing that up too. They're managing to screw that up too. 3 points over the weekend, like against playoff teams. I don't know. I feel like they're doing it wrong.
Bo Grohl, I just picked him up on fantasy this week. That guy might be carrying me to the playoffs. I had Matthews, but we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Leafs control this offseason, especially given the fact that the last 8 years, they were making the playoffs. They seem to be taking steps forward, and obviously Mitch leaves in the offseason, and they bring in some guys, maybe some harder working second, third line guys like the Nicholas Waws of the world. And then they end up flipping him for a first, which ends up actually being a pretty good trade. But we'll see how it plays out for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Let us talk a little bit too, Matty, about just maybe what's your biggest surprise this season. I know a lot of people are talking about the Buffalo Sabres kind of revamped Juju maybe after the Kevin Adams GM firing. But what in general in the NHL this season has really kind of caught your eye, especially maybe after the trade deadline fallout, like as we gear up for playoffs in a month?
Buffalo's kind of the easy one, but I'll go a different step. I got to give a lot of credit to Marco Sturm, Steve Spott, and that coaching
highest
staff
paid assistant in the NHL, right?
Highest paid assistant in the NHL, as we like to refer to him on the Fan Hockey Show. See, I know Keith listens. The job that they have done in Boston with a roster that, listen, I thought that was a lottery pick team. They bring in Tanner Jeannot. I thought they overpaid. They brought in Arvidsson. They didn't do a whole heck of a lot to improve their scoring, but it hasn't mattered. Their defense has been, Charlie McAvoy's been banged up. That poor guy's face.
He might need to have a permanent bubble on his face.
Yeah, honestly, he might be playing college hockey for the rest of his life. Like, I didn't see it with this roster, and they're a playoff team right now. And the one guy that I point to with all of this, like David Pasternak's he's a star. He's one of the top 10 players in the league, and I don't think that's within doubt. But I look at a guy like Mark Kastelik, who has been so valuable to that team under this coaching staff. He's been put in different roles. Like the other night, he was out in the overtime 3-on-3, made a great play defensively, passes it up to Pastrnak, who hits McAvoy, who's wide open because Artemi Panarin does not like back checking, especially in LA. Weather's too nice. And honestly, like, when you empower a guy like that who goes out and does the dirty work, like, other guys appreciate that. And I think that Marco Sturm has hit all the right notes with his team. The other part is, let's face it, Jeremy Swayman's better this year than he was last year. That whole contract thing turned out to be
that got in his head.
Yeah, and after they traded Brad Marchand, I honestly thought that there was going to be a couple of down years here, because that's a big part to take out of your lineup, not only from a production standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint. And they haven't missed a beat, and they've got guys coming. Like James Higgins is going to be there at some point. Will Zeller has been fantastic this year. He's really good at the World Juniors too. Like, there's some guys that they have coming, and they're not unwilling to make a big swing. Like, we know that they were in on the Rasmus Anderson sweepstakes, and I'm sure that they're willing to move off of some younger assets in order to, make this team better. So the Bruins are a big surprise to me. Like, they're not out of the woods yet. They still got to make the playoffs. But the fact that they are here after such a bad season, and not to loop it back to Toronto, but Auston Matthews said that same thing. Like, look at the Bruins. Look at the year that they had last year. Like, you got to be able to bounce back. And the Bruins have done that in spades. Like, I think that the way that they've played and the style that they do play is conducive to winning in the playoffs. And I'm not saying that they're going to go on some miraculous Stanley Cup run here, but if they can stay healthy, they're going to be a tough out. If their defense especially is healthy, that helps Jeremy Swayman. They're not a team that scores a ton of goals to begin with, so they're already kind of playoff ready, which is like the opposite of a team like the Buffalo Sabres. The Buffalo Sabres are fun as hell to watch, but I don't know that they're going to be able to defend well enough. Like, are they going to get the good goaltending? I think their defensive unit is good enough, and we'll see how Logan Stanley and Luke Schenn kind of, they work their way into this lineup and how that works. But if you can defend in the playoffs, that's going to go a long way. I don't know if Boston's going to score enough, but they're definitely going to defend well enough.
Yeah, and both those teams too. Like you mentioned, you bring it back to the Leafs because obviously you always bring it back to the Leafs. But if they kind of do what Boston did last year, where they just kind of retool on the fly, make a couple moves in the offseason and play maybe a different brand of hockey than they're used to, like maybe the Leafs can bounce back. And then to your point about Buffalo, like they didn't have to trade any premium assets to kind of bolster their depth, right? You talked about the two guys from Winnipeg, and then also I know you guys had Sam Carrick on the other day from the Rangers who got traded to Buffalo. Like those are just like really solid pieces that you put foundationally in there. You don't sacrifice the future, and you kind of see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I thought that their deadline was great, and part of that is when you build like Buffalo, like Montreal, like Utah. The moves that you have in Utah, they ended up making the Uyghur deal, but Utah and Buffalo and Montreal, they've all developed the expensive pieces. You've developed the Tage Thompsons. You traded for Josh Norris. Jack Quinn is starting to come along. They traded for Josh Doan. Like when you get to the deadline, if you can add pieces like Carrick and Stanley and Schenn, those cost you a lot less than the elite players that can push you over the top. And so those teams have already done that. That's why Buffalo, like the Josh Doan and Michael Kesselring deal has worked out very well. Like JJ Peterka didn't fit for what Lindy Ruff wanted to do. Josh Doan fits. Tage Thompson, like a glove. Tage Thompson's a stud. Josh Norris, when he's healthy, is a very, very effective National Hockey League player. Like this guy scored 30 goals. You don't do that by accident in the NHL, although some people believe that you can, which is crazy. But Jack Quinn's starting to come along. He's been playing great lately. Like when all those pieces start to come in and you add a little bit of snarl, like Stanley, like Schenn, like Sam Carrick, guys that are willing to go to the areas that other people aren't willing to do, that costs you less. That makes things a lot easier to make moves at the deadline. And we should give some credit to Kevin Adams because a lot of these pieces are ones that he put into place.
He should be in the GM of the year mix, honestly.
You know what? For some people, he might be. And they've played really well since he hasn't been there. I still haven't figured out why. But this team is a good team, and they're fun to watch. They're the best team in the National Hockey League since, I think, December 19th. And to see that, I'm happy for the city of Buffalo. Like, I'm a Bills fan. I've been a Bills fan my entire life. And to see the hockey team have success, because I've been there around playoff time when the Sabres have been good. And that it's amazing. And watching that arena when they're good and watching it, that game against Tampa Bay, where we talked to Sam Carrick about it. He's like, it felt like a game 7 in the playoffs. We're not even there yet. So I'm really excited for the prospects for the Buffalo Sabres because to me, I think the NHL is better when the Buffalo Sabres are good. And that's the best hockey market in the United States. And people will push back on a few spots, but honestly, like when the Buffalo Sabres are never in the Stanley Cup final. They haven't been since 1999, right? 99, Brett Hull skating the crease.
Hasek.
Yeah. And when you look at the TV ratings, Buffalo, outside of the two cities that are in the Stanley Cup final in the U.S., if there's two American teams, they have the highest ratings all the time.
Well, look at the Olympics. Look at the Olympics. They were the highest U.S. market.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me. Like it is a hockey hotbed. It really is. Now, have they produced the amount of hockey players that other places have? Maybe not. But in the same breath, like people love hockey and they love the Sabres. To me, because it's a smaller market, it does have like, I live in a small town. So to me, it's like a small town feel. Not that everybody knows everybody, but that's the type of feel that it has. If you go there for a Bills game and you tailgate, it's like everybody knows everybody. It's a great place to be. And it's the same for the Sabres when they're good. And I can't wait to see them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I totally agree, and they're gonna be the team I'm probably pulling for, like, with my Devils out of it. Like, I think the Sabres are a team that you can root for. You get some cool goat headgear, and you just rock with the Sabres in the playoffs. I think that's gonna be my move. Let's talk about one team quick in the East before we pop it over to the West, because the West is just an absolute gauntlet. But I thought Carolina was an interesting team because to me, they're a team loaded with salary cap space. I went to puckpedia.com and they had about 40 or some odd $1 million in deadline cap space they could have used. They have all their draft capital. Most contenders obviously get rid of their draft capital, but because of their Mikko Rantanen deal, and they were able to recoup some of that. So they had first round picks in play, and they have top prospects that teams would want. And they have a clear need for me at the 2C position. And I just thought that there's times when teams have to overspend to kind of get over the hump, especially in a year where the East is relatively weak. You look at Tampa as like the top dog there, and Buffalo's surging, but Carolina is a team that has been there before. They have the playoff pedigree. They have a good system in place with Rod Brindamore, and they're a team that I thought could have went a little bit to spend to kind of try and get through, because you never know what's going to happen in the West. If they beat the crap out of each other, if some of the top players get hurt, like, you might have a good chance at a Stanley Cup here. And to me, they were a team that was a little quiet. I think their only move was getting Nick Delorier, who's like a depth tough guy, but I thought they could have done a little bit more to bolster their group. So I'm curious what your thoughts on Carolina are.
Honestly, shocked that they didn't do anything. I thought Trocheck was just an easy move to make.
Right, especially if you strike out on Robert Thomas, right?
Yep.
Like, Trocheck is a perfect like backup option, and you knew kind of what the price was, and I didn't think it was an outrageous asking price by the Rangers, especially with a guy on term like that for $5.6 million.
Yeah, to me, it was such a. I don't want to say it's an easy deal because I'm not in those negotiations. I've never made a real person trade in my life, only fantasy trades. So I mean, I don't know what went into those discussions, but you could tell Rod Brindamore was very outgoing about his response and what he thought of the lack of activity with the team. He said as much, and he didn't mince words. So that's got to be frustrating as a coach and as an organization. Like, listen, players know best, and players know what they need on that team. And the bulk of that team returned from last year. They know what it took to get to the next level. And guess what? They didn't add much to it. It's certainly at a position that they needed to. Yeah, bringing in Nick Delorier is great, and it adds some toughness. That's fine. But in the same breath, like, I don't know how they don't go out there and do something else, especially like you mentioned with the East being as wide open as it kind of feels it is. The one thing that Carolina lost out on against, like they blew by Washington because they were faster, and Washington, they couldn't keep up. But when they got to Florida, they're not a team full of burners, but they're so physical that they can just slow you down and take that element of your game out. And that's what they did. So not only did they didn't add enough, bite for me, they also didn't address the position of need, which is a 2C. Like I would even say you could probably add a 1A. Like, that's where the Robert Thomas thing made so much sense to me, because if you win a Stanley Cup with Sebastian Aho as your 1C, that's fine. But I think you like it a hell of a lot better if Sebastian Aho is your 1C with a 1A behind him.
Totally agree.
Like that, and that's where it confused me. Like, you only have so many windows, and it's the same conversation that I've had about Montreal. Like, Montreal's got a cupboard stocked full of prospects, like high-end elite level prospects. And now you look at it and say, like, this may have been an opportunity. You never know what's going to happen next year. Like, for people planning, like, planning is great. Elliotte always
you plan, God laughs is Elliotte's thing.
Yeah, you plan, God laughs, and it's true, because you could have a devastating injury. You could just have a year where guys just don't have it, and that happens. This is the National Hockey League. Look at all the surprising stories around the league, like the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs, who went to 7 games in the Eastern Conference quarterfinal. They're both not in the playoffs. And those are the two teams, like, the Leafs gave the Panthers the best run. Neither of those teams are in the playoffs. Like, look at the Look at the injuries that the Florida Panthers have. Like, these opportunities are fleeting. And that's why, especially with the Carolina Hurricanes, who have been so close so many years just to get to the dance, for them to not do anything, I was stunned. That's the best word that I could use to describe it.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Especially given like they're such a strong team. I just figured that they'd want to kind of push their chips in a little bit, but planning never really always works out. You look at the Bruins a couple years ago when they set all the records in the regular season and were bounced by Florida in the first round. So you never know how the playoffs are going to pan out. Well, Matty, this has been great. One last question before we let you go. It's our cool bet question. If you go to puckpedia.com/coolbet, you can get in on the action today. Stay cool and bet responsibly. Puckpedia.com/coolbet. Why don't we switch it over to the Western Conference a little bit? And it seems like that Central Division is going to be an absolute gauntlet to get out of this year. Utah might be better served to get that wild card one spot so they can actually go through the Pacific Division ladder. But for me, kind of, what's your take on just the Western Conference in general this year? I think Colorado kind of did the most damage at the trade deadline, building on already the best team in the NHL, adding to, Nazem Kadri, a legit center, but then Nick Waugh, just another really good, solid piece. A lot of their centers can play wing and center. So what are your thoughts just on the Western Conference? Is Colorado going to be the team to beat just in the West and also in the entire Stanley Cup final?
I will tell you that I picked the Colorado Avalanche to win the Stanley Cup at the beginning of the season. That is documented. It's on sportsnet.ca. You can find it somewhere.
Who'd you have them facing, Matty?
The Toronto Maple Leafs. We're not going to talk about that part. We're not going to. I knew you knew that too. We're not going to talk about that part. I did end up changing it on our quarter poll to the Carolina Hurricanes, I'm pretty sure. And who knows? But listen, Colorado, the Nazem Kadri ad, again, hand to glove fit, like, makes too much sense. I didn't think that they were going to do it after the Nick Waugh deal. That felt like, okay, Nick Waugh is going to be their 3C, and they're comfortable with that with Brock Nelson. They're like, okay, great. Dallas is so good. They added Tyler Myers. I really like that team. Like, Rantanen,
Michael Bunting too.
Yeah, Michael Bunting. Like, add a little bit of bite. I think Miro Heiskanen is maybe the most. He's still so underrated. He's great, but he's still so underrated because there's other guys that just get all the spotlight. Esa Lindell doesn't get talked about enough as just such a good shutdown D.
Yep.
Especially on that pair with Heiskanen. Like, they're really good. But you look at the West. The Central, like you said, is an absolute juggernaut. The Pacific is fascinating to me. I had Anaheim getting into the playoffs. I had Joel Quenneville as my coach of the year. I didn't think that the Pacific was going to be this tight this late. Like, Vegas has battled injuries. They've also battled goaltending issues, which I said at the beginning of the year, I wonder what's going to happen with Vegas's goaltending. And they went out, they signed Carter Hart. He got hurt. We haven't heard a thing about Carter Hart since he got hurt. They said week to week. Well, this is many weeks to weeks that are starting to pile up here. And so that one was surprising to me. Edmonton continues to shoot themselves in the foot, like the goaltending. And I know they won last night, but
Ingram's now announced, right? Their starter at this point.
Ingram is the starter. Like, Draisaitl got banged up. Like, there's just too many questions about the Oilers, more so than in years past. Like, I didn't think
and I love the Connor Murphy move. Like, I thought that was a great move. He's another guy that can fit in there like a glove.
And I like the Dickinson move as well. But all these moves aren't going to matter if you can't get saves when it matters. And we could say whatever we want about Stuart Skinner. Stuart Skinner made saves for them in the playoffs when they needed it. There is a chance that Calvin Pickard is making starts for them in the playoffs. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility right now. And so they're kind of a weird team. Like, as like the West kind of, if the Central wasn't such a juggernaut, the West would feel kind of wide open too, because it feels really top heavy. And then there's a lot of the same. Edmonton's kind of in a different category because they have the two nuclear options. Vegas has the experience. So maybe they're in a different category as well. But like, we also don't talk a lot about Alex Pietrangelo not being on that Vegas team right now and the leadership and what he brings to the roster. Rasmus Anderson's been there. Like, it's been kind of mixed reviews about him being in Vegas. So the West is interesting just because it does feel top heavy. But if you're a team in the Pacific, like you mentioned, if the teams in the Central beat the crap out of each other for 2 rounds, you may get a broken team by the time you get there. It may end up being a team out of the Pacific that gets to the Cup final because there's just no gas left in the tank. That's what happened to Dallas last year. Like Edmonton,
totally.
Edmonton won their first round series against LA after being down 2-0. They rolled Vegas. And then by the time Dallas got to them, Dallas still put up a good fight, but they just didn't have that extra oomph to get them over the line. And it ended up, costing Pete DeBoer his job. So it's a fascinating look at the West because there is something that strikes me that if those series between the Central teams are as brutal as we think they're going to be and as hard as they are to play in, I do wonder if a team from the Pacific gets out of there, just because I don't want to say you're fresh as a daisy, because you might not be either, but certainly those series don't look like they're going to be the same type of volatility as what you might get in the Pacific.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're all excited for the playoffs this year. It doesn't feel like there's a clear-cut favorite, maybe outside of Colorado, but to your point, they also probably have the toughest path to get to the Cup final. So excited for the playoff push now. We have about a month until it starts. Matty, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Like you mentioned, go to Sportsnet, listen to their show every day, the Fan Hockey Show from 12 to 2 Eastern. Elliotte Friedman will be on all 5 days during the playoffs, 4 days a week now. They get GMs. I was listening to Bill Armstrong on the other day. Just a great show. Anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
You can follow me on Twitter at MattyMar89 or on Instagram at MattyMar89SN. There's some stuff that goes up there. Some of it's funny, some of it's not. You can make the choice if you want to follow it or not. But I appreciate you having me on, Keith. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And, if you follow Futa on Instagram too, I think he told me that his mom takes pictures of the show and then posts it on his Instagram story. So that's honestly my favorite thing about what he does on social.
Yeah, she gets a lot of us with compromising faces. Like we don't look great in some of them. So which is even more part of the ongoing joke that we have there. So yeah, it's Futs is, first of all, I would like to say Futs is awesome. And having the show with him has been an absolute blast, and I've learned so much from him. And the stories that I get about his mom and his dad are hilarious. They are fantastic. So they're all good people, as we would say, and it's been a blast to work with Futs.
Awesome. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for hopping on, and make sure you're listening to his show every single weekday on Sportsnet and wherever you get your podcasts.
PuckPedia.